Hello, my friends, and welcome back. Thank you very much for being with me again today. There will be no negotiations between Putin and Zelensky. Putin spared Zelensky's life at the beginning of the conflict, and that's according to the then Prime Minister of Israel, Mr. Bennett. I made a video on that a while ago when Bennett had an interview for 4 hours. I will explain this later in this video. The thing is, Putin will not talk to Zelensky. Zelensky implemented and passed that, had that law passed, and only he can talk to Putin if he wants. But Putin says, no, you are illegitimate. You have no legitimacy to sign any documents. Therefore, I'm not going to talk to you. So I'm glad that Putin goes straight to the supervisor instead of talking to people who have no authority, according to Putin. So Putin is going to talk to Trump, not Zelensky. That's the first one. Second one, Putin says that the war could end within weeks. And the third one, Zelensky, who, remember, Putin said is illegitimate. Zelensky says that Putin confirms again that he's afraid to negotiate. No, he's not afraid to negotiate. He will not negotiate with you. That's the difference. So these three topics today. Let's start with the first one. Here. Russia Today, the 28th of January 2025. Ukraine conflict could end in weeks, Putin says. Vladimir Zelensky is dependent on Western life support, the Russian president has said. That's been the case for years already. I think 3 years. The Ukraine conflict could end in 2 months of Kiev if Kiev is deprived of money, probably if Kiev is deprived of the money and the ammunition it depends on to continue fighting, Putin said, in 2 months. 2 months. He said in weeks. Well, 8 weeks. Speaking to a reporter on Tuesday, Putin was asked about the possibility of negotiated end to the Russia-Ukraine conflict. And I'm quoting, "They can't exist without their Western sponsors. They won't last a month if the money and ammunition run out. I think it's accurate. Everything can be over in a month and a half to 2 months. Ukraine practically has no sovereignty in that sense," Putin says. According to Putin, if Kiev Western backers truly want peace, this is very easy to do, adding that Moscow has already spelled out its terms very clear. Oh, I thought they just did it unprovoked and undefendable or something like this. All right, so Kiev can signal its willingness to talk by canceling the decree banning all negotiations with Russia, Putin said. He explained that without such a step, any proposed negotiations would be as illegitimate as Zelensky, whose presidential mandate expired last spring, he says. The US and other backers of Ukraine has channeled more than $200 billion in aid to Kiev. Russia Today. Zelensky lacks legitimacy to sign any deal. The Ukrainian leader does not even have the authority to lift his own ban on negotiating with Moscow, the Russian president has said. Ukraine Vladimir Zelensky can participate in possible talks with Moscow if he wishes to, but he lacks the legitimacy to actually sign a peace deal, Putin said. So, negotiating with the de facto Ukrainian leadership will not have any legal meaning, given that Kiev explicitly banned itself from engaging in talks with Moscow, according to Putin. That's nice, you see, according to Putin. In 2022, Zelensky, whose presidential term officially ended in May 2024, issued a decree prohibiting negotiations with Russia and President Vladimir Putin specifically, a measure that remains in effect. Last week, Zelensky claimed the ban applies to all Ukrainian officials except himself, although the original decree did not specify a list of entities barred from talking to Russia, stating only that such negotiations were, quote-unquote, impossible. Again, if I'm quoting Putin, if we start negotiations now, they will be illegitimate because what the current head of the regime, this is what he said on the other article, that's the only way to call Zelensky today signed this decree. He was a somewhat legitimate president, but now he can't cancel it because he is illegitimate. That's the trick, the catch, the trap. So what he's saying is that when the decree was issued, Zelensky had legitimacy to a certain sort, he said. But according to Putin and the Russian interpretation of the Ukrainian constitution, that's gone. Therefore, Zelensky has no authority to cancel the decree he issued because he's illegitimate. Well, I'm not going to go into the interpreting the constitution, because if you interpret the constitution into two different entities that supposedly are at war, remember the Second Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, the right to carry and own guns and all that. Some say no, it's only for the militia, and some no, everyone should have it because of the coma over there and so on. So within one country, in this case United States of America, the interpretation of their own constitution could be tricky, let alone people who are really having a war interest or a war to win. And let's see what Zelensky says about Putin. Ukrainska Pravda, January 28, 2025. Zelenskyy, right here, says, Putin confirms again he is afraid of negotiations and doing all he can to prolong war. I think it's the other way around, if you ask me. And if you didn't ask me, I will tell you anyway. So Putin confirms. Okay, let's see what this Stein's argument is. Is that like a bizarre argument? Ukraine's president, Volodymyr Zelensky, I like that, instead of saying the Ukrainian president, has said that every move made by Russian, there you go, put it like this, Russian leader Vladimir Putin is aimed at prolonging the war and avoiding genuine, that's the key word, negotiations. So if Putin wants to negotiate, he's going to say, no, that's not genuine. Therefore, genuine is when you satisfy my genuine, my definition of genuine. Quote from Zelensky Stein. Today, Putin once again confirmed that he is afraid of negotiations, afraid of strong leaders, and is doing everything possible to prolong the war. Every move he makes and all his cynical tricks are aimed at making the war endless. Now, let me unpack this. He's an adult, right? He's an adult. Do adults talk like that? For instance, once again confirmed that he's afraid. I don't know if he's afraid or he just doesn't want to negotiate. He doesn't want to because he doesn't like the terms. But he says he already ascribes intent or, afraid of strong leaders like him, he obviously implies. And he's doing everything possible. He can drop a few nuclear bombs and then there will be everything possible. So again, who talks like this? Everything, all and nothing. To prolong the war, every move, each and every move he makes, and all his cynical tricks. So all, everything. Who talks like this? A liar, a big liar. In 2014, Russia started the hybrid war against Ukraine. Really? Why don't we start with 2014 overthrow of a government first? So, see, history doesn't start when you want it to start. How about we go back to 1991, when NATO promised, or United States of America promised Russia no expansion to the east of NATO, expansion 1 inch. It was a gentleman agreement, and it was not written anywhere. So a gentleman agreement, if someone broke it, which the Western civilized world broke it, then next time we have everything on paper. Now, if you would dare to call these guys that, hey, you're not gentlemen, you're not civilized, look what you did, they will feel offended. Do you give a shit? I don't. So again, so Putin started a war, not Kiev sending tanks to Donbass. No, Putin started it. All right, my friends, Putin is not going to negotiate with Zelensky because Zelensky is not the legitimate president, according to Putin. He shouldn't negotiate with Zelensky because Zelensky is just a puppet and the supervisor resides in Washington, D.C. And the supervisor of the supervisor resides somewhere on this globe. And he has three names: banks, military industrial complex, and energy industry, which is natural resources, energy. That's what I'm talking about, industry. So those guys harness the presidents, the politicians. The politicians direct and channel resources into the military and in CIA and other methods like economic sanctions and so on. And then you got Zelensky, who's playing a role, again, sponsored by the same politicians who are at the orders of the big interest. Regarding Putin, Putin is a legitimate ruler of Russia. And, I mean, according to their law, not with what these guys want. It's up to the Russians to decide if their president is legitimate, not to the Americans to recognize Putin as being legitimate. The Russians can do the same thing here and say this is not a legitimate government. Trump is not a legitimate president. Why? Well, we know. I can say with the swamp, we got the sponsors. He was just led to be over there. Look at the other elections with Biden. Was that legitimate? Why don't you ask the Russians? And you would say, why should we ask the Russians? So the same thing applies over here. Why should we ask others if our country has legitimate or illegitimate elections? We know in 2014 that was a coup, bloody coup in Ukraine, orchestrated, sponsored and helped by the lovers of democracy, and the government that took control of Ukraine after the so-called color revolution, Maidan and so on, was illegitimate. And since then, the next governments, even though elected, were illegitimate by my definition, by my assessment. And I always explain why do I say that. It is like a king. So a king has the power to rule, and it's based on the how do you call it? I'm not going to try to find big words, but my son, my firstborn son, will be the next ruler. Not my brother's son, my son. Now, if my brother cuts me off and he becomes the ruler, he is not the legitimate ruler by the laws of the land. And his son is not going to be the legitimate ruler, even though he's the son of the king. Why? Because he killed me. I was the ruler. So that's the way I took it in Europe, in this case in Ukraine. You overthrew a legitimate government, Viktor Yanukovych, in 2014, that was democratically elected with its corruption that is everywhere, more or less, but it's everywhere, I would say. Maybe not everywhere. Maybe you can tell me where exactly it's not. But by my assessment, I don't think we have a perfect society anywhere on this planet. And then you conducted some elections without Donbass and without the Crimean Peninsula, and with the new rulers who organized the elections, the ones that took power through Now, if you think that's okay, then imagine, and you're American or a Canadian, imagine that someone will do the same thing to our government. Someone will come, orchestrate, let's say, an outside entity, agencies will organize it, will overthrow it by, some bloody mess here, take control of this country. We have had elections. So would that government be legitimate? But will be recognized immediately by the sponsors of the coup. So again, and what comes next? These guys organize whatever they want, but without about, 10 states out of the 50 of the United States of America. Why? Because those guys decided that they don't recognize this illegitimate government. And then you tell me that Putin orchestrated the hybrid war? All right, my friends, let me go over. I had to refresh my memory. I know I said something at the beginning of this video that I will disclose. It was Bennett, he was the prime minister of Israel in 2022 when the war broke up, and he was in Moscow, this Bennett, and he spoke with Putin, and right when the war started, and went and spoke with Putin and asked Putin if Putin will kill Zelensky, and Putin said, "No, I'm not going to kill Zelensky." Probably he said he will, but anyway, he said, "No, I'm not gonna." And he said, "Promise me you won't do that." And then Putin again said, "No, I will not kill Zelensky. No, nothing." So he's not going to negotiate with someone who's a dead man walking. But after Bennett, the prime minister of Israel, walked out of the Kremlin, while he was walking towards his airplane, he called Zelensky. He had the direct number. And Zelensky was in the bunker at that time, hiding like a rat. And Bennett told Zelensky that Putin said he's not going to kill him. And then Zelensky, this is according to the interview, and I made a video on that one. And Zelensky asked, "Are you sure? Are you sure? Are you sure?" And Bennett said, "Yes, he promised me he's not going to kill you." And then after 2 hours after that, that's according to Bennett, the prime minister of Israel, Jewish like Zelensky. After 2 hours after that, Zelensky came out in a televised speech and he said, "We're not afraid. We're not going to back down." Blah, 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 blah. So he was all tough. Why? Because the guy said, "I'm not going to kill you." He's going to. Anyway, my friends, thank you very much for being with me again today. Stay strong, stay smart, look for the truth, and be just.